for you, that's when being an entrepreneur really sucks. Because then you don't get to talk to the customer, you're like out raising money, you're trying to make sure the railroad's running on time. It's like so-and-so is complaining. That's like you're running the business. So there's a difference between working in the business and on the business. Right now you're working in the business because you're an entrepreneur. Eventually you're going to be working on the business and you don't get to do all these fun things.
What did your cat do that inspired you to put her in the middle of the pool?
That's not her.
Oh, it's a different cat?
It's a different cat.
It's a stray you caught.
It just happened. Google images.
Yeah, I'm just realizing, I was like, what you're saying, I was like, I think people really do like seeing animals, and even like PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah.
It's like probably like half of people have pets, and so you're like, oh, my pet, I really like this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. For us. Especially when you're talking about legal services, which everyone hates talking about.
Yeah.
Corporates and pets.
Yep. But figure out what that is, right? Maybe different people respond to pets, other people respond to, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
can
don't
do
know.
a pet and a statistic.
Um,
And an emotion.
So like a lot of this, like I said, we're focused, this is all around customer needs, right? Because if you don't understand this stuff, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the sales pitch is. It doesn't matter what your presentation. It doesn't matter, you can be, sort of a slick, what's that?
A lot of emotion coming
I'm
out of that
sorry, I
corner
said
over
something
there.
I shouldn't have said. It had nothing to do with you guys, I was looking at
So as we're wrapping up this first part of customer needs, I wanted to help you focus on, so we were talking about the reasons people buy: increase revenue, decrease cost, increase efficiency, decrease risk. A second way you want to think about this is exactly what problem are you solving for somebody, not at like their specific level, but more so like principally there's a couple of different problems that you can look at within organizations that exist, that if you can talk to executives in this language, they'll understand what you mean. So let me go through these four. The first one is called coordination, improving the coordination problem. This is a big area in the topic of organizational behavior. And it turns out most companies are inefficient. Shocking. We've all worked at big companies. You worked at Edison. Anybody else here work at a big company?
Sony Music.
Sony Music?
So
Dentons,
inefficient.
the biggest law firm in the
Oh,
world.
okay. Like you can see this every day, how inefficient. It's so inefficient you have to have all these internal meetings. You've worked at a big company? Yeah, I mean, you know. And so if, in a lot of cases, like if you can explain to people how your software, it's going to increase revenue or efficiency or decrease risk or decrease cost. But if you can talk to them in terms of coordination, solving a coordination problem. So that means like cross-departmentally. A lot of companies now are matrix organizations. They're supposed to be talking to each other and working with each other, yet nobody's accountable. So if you can figure out a way, again, this is more like on an enterprise side, but if you can think of a way to improve coordination between assets or people, that's a big problem that people have. So it's just sort of a high-level framework. And I'll make all these slides available to you, but feel free to do anything else. The second problem to solve is reducing friction. Reducing friction. What do we mean by friction within a big company in particular?
Miscommunication?
Yeah, that's part of it, yeah.
How difficult it is to get things done?
Exactly. Yeah, like processes and frameworks and like all this bureaucracy. It's like, okay, so this division is like handles customer service, but this division is IT and handles all the internal software that the customer service people use. Well, if the customer service people need something changed, they have to go open up a ticket and the IT person has to work on it, has to get queued and prioritized and all these other things. Like, this should be something that should be, it's software, it should be make a request that should update automatically, as an example. But maybe that's like, that request takes 3 weeks. So if your software, in an enterprise sense, could reduce that friction, that's like a major problem. It's called transaction costs in an economic way. Economic terms are called transaction costs. And what's interesting, there's an economist back in this guy Ronald Coase, C-O-A-S-E. It's like 1937, he wrote this paper called The Nature of the Firm. And his basic theory was that the reason that companies exist is to reduce transaction costs. Like the only reason, like we all used to be like farmers and trappers and hunters, and we just all trade and barter. But eventually, as the economy grew, we realized like that level of specialization was actually too extreme. So it was better to do some things together. Like it's like kind of a conglomerate. And so whether you outsource or you insource is sort of based on whether or not you got more efficiency by insourcing it versus paying somebody else to do it. But the problem is sometimes companies get so big that the friction becomes even greater than if you would have outsourced. So then there's all this frustration. That's what people point to as bureaucracy. Like, oh my God, every time I want to do something, I have to get Mary's approval, and Mary always takes so long, and blah, 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 blah. So if you can figure out a way to reduce friction within a company, maybe think with that from a partnership standpoint somehow. I'm not sure.
So, well, we're reducing friction within the industry, 'cause, like, that's how law is done right now at the.
Oh, yeah,
that most
interesting.
people can afford.
Yeah.
It's a whole bunch of, like, one or two firms of 1 or 2 or 3 people.
Right.
Each specializing in their respective little area. It's all
So
being
for them
super
to find the
inefficient.
person in the middle of Iowa that has this problem and they're an attorney in Florida, it's
Yeah.
actually really hard.
Yeah, it's super hard. And there's
Got
tons
it.
of friction, there's tons of waste. It's like incredibly inefficient. What's the name of the sort of the Economist again?
Oh, Coase, Ronald Coase, C-O-A-S-E. His paper's called The Nature of the Firm. He ended up winning a Nobel Prize in like the 60s or 70s or something. He's a pretty smart guy.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
gonna use his theory.
Coasean theory of
Coasean.
economics, yeah. Yeah, so reducing friction, so in your case, the marketplace, and maybe in your case, you can use this and somehow, maybe working with schools over time, if you ever wanted to do that, for example. The third problem to solve is creating new information that may not exist before. So, the example here is that if a process is really manual, and a lot of people might be like entering data into a spreadsheet. You don't know who did what when, and then you don't know like the past history of the version of the file. If your software helps figure out who did what when and how long it took them, that's new information, and it helps a manager figure out where there could be efficiency gains in the process. So you can think about ways maybe that your product or service creates new information. Not every product or service does these things. These are just sort of problems these are big problems that big executives are always thinking about. So thinking about how do I coordinate my people and my assets better. They're thinking about how do I reduce friction to get things done. They're thinking about how do I get better visibility into what's happening in my company, in my organization. And then the fourth thing that they're thinking about is, anybody here anybody take up economics course? What does this thing look like? If you remember way back.
Well,
This is a production possibilities curve.
oh, yes.
It's a production possibilities curve. So in lingo, it's sort of called X efficiency. And the idea here is like, how do I make sure that the people and assets that I have in my company are actually maximized? Am I getting the most out of them? Like, okay, I can hire 50 people to do this thing, but if I get software that can only need 20 people, and those 20 people, instead of doing 50 calls a day can do 75, then I'm actually getting, that's what I theorized. So a lot of times you think about it, like you hire somebody expecting something to happen, and then a lot of times it doesn't always happen. You're like, oh, we're gonna hire this person, add them to the production process, and it's gonna increase our output by X%. But it turns out in most cases it actually doesn't. There's some lag, or some sort of like volume inside of this production curve somewhere. So the idea is figuring out, as a manager, I'm trying to figure out how am I making sure that the people and the assets that I have in this company are being maximized. So anyway, this is just sort of 4 problems that you can think of. Like if you're ever thinking about a big executive, these are 4 things that keep executives up at night. Why don't we take a break here? We've been going on about an hour. And then the next section we'll start going a little faster because I really like spending so much time on customer needs because it really helps us get to the core of how you're thinking about your product, what problem you're solving, and for who. So let's take a few minutes and then we'll come back. We'll talk about buyers and go through some of the rest. Sound good?
Yes.
So it's 10:07, back at 10:15.
Okay, cool.
Cool.